All right, y'all, do you have any questions? And Lynn, we're going until just after 11? Or what?
11:15.
That's what I thought, see? Yes, ma'am.
So
Can you tell us where you're coming from, or where you work?
I
Or?
actually work for NACSA.
Weird. Okay, go.
So in the video, they mentioned parents having school options for their kids. You guys have mentioned many times parents having school options
Yes,
for
ma'am.
their kids. How do we get parents, especially in some of these low-income communities, who don't care about options for their kids? How do we get them to care about better options and education for their kids?
That's a great question. Can I answer that first? Go. So, two things. The first one is the vast majority of parents do care. I've moved away from saying all parents care, because there are some parents who literally don't. That you have to educate the kids in spite of the parents. But for the most part, parents do want quality education. And our experience, in particular in New Orleans, where we have a voucher program, and I know we got all the charter people here who are like, we don't like vouchers. But anyway,
I like vouchers.
There you go.
Yeah.
So we have a voucher program that's tied to low-income students in New Orleans. And one of the most amazing things that we saw is year after year, when we would have sign-up period, the conversations that would take place between parents about what was a quality private school for them to choose versus one that was not. And when those parents start saying, you would ask the parent, what's your first choice? And a parent would name a particular school, and another parent across the room would hear it. And she would say, baby, are you out of your mind? I was there last year, and I had to get my kid out of there in 2 months. You don't want to go there. And they start to have these dialogues that for some reason people think low-income parents don't know how to have. Right? And in a way, it's kind of offensive to think that our parents don't have the sophistication and the intelligence to have those conversations. But when you're a new consumer, it takes you a little while to learn how to be a good consumer. So, once we start giving them some choices and options for the first time, I believe they will start to make better decisions. And I think those of us on the outside have to make sure we're giving them good information so that they could do that.
Yep.
I agree with you on that. And I also think, too, that I do think a lot of parents don't understand what all the choices are.
Right.
In California, one of the things we're doing right now under Democrats for Education Reform is really doing this whole You Have Choice public education campaign. There are actually laws on the book. I wrote a few of them, but there are others as well. And then there's federal law. And the public school system is difficult to navigate. My mother had a 6th grade level of education. I always go back and think, when I try to write something, would my mother understand this? There's literacy, and then you add to it as well, too. Especially in California, English or Spanish. What level of literacy? So I think, I do believe that most parents do care. They want the best option, but sometimes we just don't know what the choices are. And I think part of this movement should be about teaching parents just simply, this is the law, these are the laws, these are your choices, and I think they'll take it from there.
I once had the opportunity to be in Los Angeles with a great parent organizing group that was talking to the LA Unified District. Bizarre, Tuesday morning at 10. So these mothers had left work. They brought their kids in. They sat in the back of the room because they're Latina and deferential. You cannot get to be able to come. There's lots of respect for authority. But about 100 people, I kid you not, and the district folks are in the front of the room, and somebody raised the question of how do we get parents involved? We just can't get them involved. They're at the back of the room, for God's sake. And so somebody said, well, if you have pizza or whatever, oh man. This mom stood up, and she was so beautiful and so lovely. She's speaking Spanish, but we were doing a translation, and she basically said, okay, here's the deal. You lied to us about our children. You tell us they're doing fine. They're doing terribly. You expect us to come eat your pizza? We don't want your pizza. Treat me like a real live person. It was the most beautiful thing. There was somebody there from the U.S. Department who said, oh, Lisa, you got to shut this down. This isn't about pizza. So uncomfortable. He's having an Episcopalian moment like those of us who are Episcopalian do. Oh, my God, disruption. And I said, no, this is about pizza. You got to let that go. Yep. Because sometimes it's just about what you're not ready to hear, about what you won't see. These parents were in the room, and they weren't being seen. Yeah. So sometimes it's just what you expect, and it's why it's so important. You act affirmatively, and everybody's always there. So anyway, next, ma'am.
Thank you all. My name is Carol Beck. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, so I do a little bit of support work for charter schools. And I'm thinking about Sister Bay, I believe, who you talked about in Newark, and how do we increase the capacity, as much as just to get quality seats. I'd love to attract some of these national networks, but they're not coming to Maryland, right? They're being courted by, all the other cities in this room. Meanwhile, the importance to support people like Sister Bay and increasing capacity of those organizations. So here's my suggestion that I would love you guys to talk about. The national organizations, BAEO and NACSA and DFER and STAND and the Alliance, Sister Bay shouldn't have to, get some friends in the country club to connect to the national foundations. These intermediary organizations, how do we challenge our friends who are at Grant Makers for Education right now can we throw a challenge out to them to, whether it's through the Alliance and through their partners, the local foundations, right? So my project comes from local philanthropy, and those foundations do know the community, and they do know about capacity building. So is there a bridge that could be created there where the national funder, frankly, doesn't, I love you guys, but come in necessarily with its own initiative, but truly as a partner with the local foundations who know the territory a little bit, and then the Sister Bays and her colleagues have the capacity building that they need, and we get more quality seats that are more community-based. So.
I think this is a great recommendation, and I love action plans, as I know you do, Greg. But I'm sitting here and I'm asking myself, I wonder, do we have, and you guys might know the answer to this, do we have some national initiative going on among the organizations which is this sort of affirmative act to ensure that we're looking at these smaller community startup stuff? I know you guys do this, Ken, internally at BAO, so Black-led schools, high-quality schools in local communities. So what kind of shape does that take now?
Well, I think if I had to look at our work and say how we think the best way to address this is, because we've had some of these conversations with funders, and it is my sense that they're not going to change their lens, right, through which they look at this work. They're not going to say, well, we're looking at everything through this lens, but all of a sudden we'll look at it through this different lens over here. The question that we have is, how do we get our people, oriented so that they could be seen through that lens? Right? So again, it goes back to the conversation I had. When I talked to Darryl Cobb and he says, look, we don't want to impact 1,000 kids, we want to impact 10,000. So how do we put enough schools together so that we could go to him with a package and says, okay, here are 10,000 kids you can impact. But the go it alone strategy, I think, is incredibly difficult for the national foundations unless they have made a strategic investment in a particular city. So if Gates has decided, for example, that Memphis is one of their cities, so they spend quite a bit of money in Memphis. But I doubt that a lot of that money would translate to Nashville because their focus is Memphis. But we really, I think, have to do a better job of orienting our schools and our communities, so that they understand what the lens is. Because I think once they understand it, you'll have a lot more people able to get through it.
I think another issue we need to consider is that each state has its own set of strange pieces of legislation.
Yeah.
I mean, as we speak, 20 years later celebrating, the state of Washington is trying to crawl into existence. There's an initiative, right? Exactly. I was a bit like, oh my God, morose in California. Then I learned about Washington. I felt
so
better.
sad.
But also in LA, we have a board member, a former TFA'er, by the way, who has introduced a resolution to declare a moratorium in the nation's second largest school district to stop accepting applications for new charter schools. So and of course too, we find in California, we've seen very ugly legislation that has been moved through the legislature trying to block the progress. So even as we look at this from a national perspective, we've got state issues, city issues, philanthropy issues, et cetera. I think that one of the difficulties there is that we don't want to see, and I've heard from some charter authorizers, forget California, it's too complex, too many regulations, you got a bunch of crazy people there in the legislature, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go somewhere else where it's easier.
Right.
And I don't think that moves us forward as a nation. So I think as we go forward, we've got to figure out how do we, obviously, we've got to be practical, build where the strengths are, go ahead and take advantage of that, build, but figure out how we work on trying to turn around and push back on bad legislation that would shut us down in big, important population centers.
Yeah, and you know, Gloria also, real quick, makes a good point about working in tough areas. You know, so you're in California. A lot of our work is in the South. So we're in Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, where they have no charter school laws, and it's incredibly tough conversation. And in Alabama, in particular, it's like a knife fight in the alley, you know, trying to get something done. It is. It's just tough. But when we talk to our national funders who fund this work, especially early, there are two things that we try to help them to understand. One, a state like Mississippi has no real business presence or no real foundation presence. So when you come in and you want to start funding in Mississippi, we need you to have a long-term perspective. You're not going to have some Fortune 500 company that starts to, you know, offset this. It's just not going to happen. Whereas a place like Ohio, you know, where we do some work, there are tons of wealthy people, foundations. And so I think we have to make help the foundations understand how to build connections and bridges in those places where there are more resources. And they are going to want to see those resources increasingly come to play so they feel like it's a partnership. But then really make the case for those places where we know, despite wanting to have some more money come in locally, it's just not going to happen.
Very good. Somebody have a microphone? And next question? Yes, ma'am. There. Oh, there's the microphone. Yes, sir. Hang on one second. Let's get you on tape, right? This is why we're doing the mic. Thank you.
Just maybe go back to the segregation question, because it's a huge issue, especially with our urban. In Europe, they talk about sorting in kids and, you know, school choices worldwide. But as you read about that, there are consequences to education when all low-income kids choose to go to the same school and all upper-middle-class kids choose to go to the same school. So is it good enough that we give parents a choice and shoot for the highest quality school, or do we have a higher calling to make sure that our schools represent our larger communities?
Well, I mean, yeah, and you know, I think my answer is still pretty much the same. You know, I do think, I mean, I would like for that to happen. I think it's a goal that we should shoot for. I just don't know that we've ever been successful in government as kind of forcing this to happen, right? I just, you know, what we have to do is we have to get to the point to where our schools are good enough across the board that people are willing to cross lines voluntarily. You know, when you get people who want to do this, it works. You know, and when you get people who don't, it doesn't work. You know, people just, you know, they opt out. They set up their own private schools in their communities. They move somewhere else. You create this whole black market for education of people who opt out of, you know, whatever the government system is. I think it's a great ideal. I just don't know that it's worked anyway. I was reading a few weeks ago about San Francisco, where they have this very convoluted, you know, system of trying to assign kids in different places, and you know, some people are just like, this is crazy. So I don't know.
It is that difficult question, and that's why, again, to Plessy versus Brown, and that's not exactly what we're looking at, but to some extent, those are some of the bigger questions. I think it's part of it looking at, don't get sucked into that language of resegregation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get sucked into the language of creaming. I still look at it and I think, what do I see today? When I look at California, I see an existing segregated public school system.
Right.
And it's been that way for some time.
Yep.
And I see a school system that produces disproportionately numbers of African American and Latino and high poverty kids who cannot read at basic levels of proficiency that essentially assure that they will never have a chance to participate in a global economy. So I'm looking at sort of what I'm seeing and where I want to go. And if in the meantime, if I say, I am going to work with these parents to get into a school site where they have a qualified and competent teacher, where there is a high bar of expectation, where when they graduate, not if they graduate, they are advanced levels of proficiency, that they have a path to college. To me, I'll take that. If that classroom, or overwhelming, that classroom is entirely Latino or African American.
Yep.
Because to me, it's it's the outcome. I would not be happy saying, okay, we are an integrated system and we're all failing.
Right.
That's not working.
Right.
So equality, equity, adequacy,
Yep.
outcomes, I just think that's the easiest argument for opponents to throw at us cuando le conviene, when it's now.
Yep.
And it's sort of, you know.
And you know, and as a charter community, I mean, I think we have to be more circumspect and thoughtful about who we really are.
Right.
Right? Are we grandiose enough to believe that we can solve a problem that society hadn't been able to solve at all, which is, integrated schools, and I just, we got to be true to who we are. And I don't want any school leader focusing on, I'm worried about the racial, produce a good school, educate kids, that's what you're in this to do. And if you do that well and all this other stuff flows along, that's great. Be a part of the conversation that you're having in your city. But, school leaders, we have school leaders now who are coming and saying, well, I want to try to create this diverse school, so I want to carve out, some population here and save some seats here. You know what? Put a good school in the community that you want to work in, and if you do it well enough, the kids will come. I really believe that.
Yeah, the painful, this is such a great conversation, and the painful reality is that the hope of integration was equal access, but the reality was you could fly over a school and it looks integrated, but the kids in that school from the community are still in checkbook math, and you attracted white kids in for IB or accelerated program that the African American kids, Latino kids in Phoenix, that I'd use Phoenix as an example, never had access to. They're on the same campus now. Yep. They're not eating lunch together. They're not in class together, and you can't pat yourself on the back about that. That's a bad outcome with exactly the right intention. And so, I wrote down we're not going to get sucked into a conversation that's not real, and we're not going to have that. We're going to have the real conversation, which is about quality access. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think I'm going to continue right on with this conversation because I think there's a voice that hasn't been spoken yet, and it is this voice. I 100% support what you said, that it is offensive for anyone to say that an all African-American school somehow is not as good.
Can't be quite.
And so, and as an authorizer, I was proud in the Chicago Public Schools when we authorized African American all boys schools.
Yep.
So there, I'm for that. But I will tell you that as a white parent sitting on the other side of the fence, I get nauseous having my white child go to a school that's all white.
Yep.
Do you understand? So I want diversity. And when you said parents in your neighborhood, I totally, if I were a parent in your neighborhood, born with that skin color,
right,
I would say exactly the diversity would be low on the list for a lot of reasons, which I respect.
Yep.
But as a white person on the other side of the fence, who's spent a good lifetime in the public school fight, I actually object to and am horrified that my children and my neighbors' children are going to schools that are not reflective of the real world.
Right.
And so I want you to say the difference between Plessy and Brown is I do believe that there are fewer folks here in America that are white that ever want Plessy to be true again. So there is a white voice out there. I'm sorry to just use the color line, but you know what I'm talking about. There are a lot of people who would never want to go to Plessy again. So I don't even think we should all say that word Plessy anymore. So.
Good point.
It's such a great perspective.
Yeah.
No, it's a great perspective and an
It is.
aspirational perspective. I absolutely agree, and I think you have to lift it up. This is something that we're all hoping for, and I think Ken was right when he said, quality gets you there.
And also, see, I believe that deliberate design matters a whole lot, right? Where you place a school tells me a lot about the kind of population that you want to attract. If I'm going to the toughest part of Memphis, there are kids that I want to educate who need what I have designed, right, and what I'm trying to do. If I set it up in the suburbs, there are kids there that need what I have designed. And so I think, part of the way we get around this and get past this is by people being true to what they really believe schools should be and look like, and go about doing that the best you can. And so I would be hopeful that there will be someone who says, you know what, I have this same value, and so I want to start a school, and I'm going to place it here because I know if I place it at this location, I will get parents of different races who want to come. But that has to be somebody's vision, not something that we try to thrust upon them, I think.
And I think one of the fastest ways that we get towards integration is by allowing choice, by recognizing the power of zip code and how it's tied, schools tied to real estate and housing and everything. So you're right, when you said earlier, this is a bigger question in America, and it has been since our birth and founding, and we're dealing with it today in 2012. But I think that if we do not allow for choice, if we don't allow for parent involvement in education and the right to sort of figure out what do I need and what do I want and what can I access, then I think we really are going to continue to be, tearing our hair out as we try to figure out, how we resolve these issues.
Yeah. All right.
You got one over there.
Just a
Yes,
really
ma'am.
quick kind of comment to throw out there. I feel sometimes there is something that's missing from the conversation when it comes to charters, and that's why are the kids not achieving? I feel like sometimes we think we can get a great new facility and high quality teachers and we can throw it into, I come from an urban area, so I'll just say we can throw it into an urban area, and then we all kind of look around like, why aren't the kids doing well? And with charter comes flexibility and autonomy, and I think as authorizers, and as people who are part of the charter schools, we need to maybe lean on that a little bit more, research or delve a little bit further into what alternatives can we use, what different strategies can we use to have these kids, do better. I think of I'm come from Milwaukee Public Schools, but I grew up in the suburbs, and in the school in which I went to, we had a lot of kids, not through charter, but through our 220 program. They were kind of bused into the suburbs. And unfortunately, the statistics show that this population of, my fellow brown and, black students who are coming from the inner city to these suburban schools, they did just as poorly in these suburban schools. So it's not the school. You can have a lot of highly qualified teachers, but we need to delve deeper. Why are they not achieving?
Yeah.
Do you guys want to talk
No,
a little bit?
I think the point stands.
Yeah.
I think it's a great point. The simple answer is this is just hard, right? There are so many people who, they will come to my office and they talk about a charter school and they get their charter approved, and I say that was the easiest part of this process.
That's right.
And they would complain, right? Because only like 20% would get through. And they would say, I was like, yeah, that was the easy part. Because tomorrow you got to go see these kids. And, I just, my favorite philosopher is Mike Tyson.
Seriously.
Absolutely. Because Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get in the ring and get hit. Right? And I think the same thing applies to charter school. Everybody has this great plan about these schools and what they're going to do. And when the kids come in, it's just hard. And it's just like getting punched continuously by kids who won't conform to the stuff you wrote on this paper, and that you thought they were going to conform to.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
And then how many rounds?
Yeah,
So again, too, in terms of looking at
absolutely.
achievement, first round, second round,
Absolutely.
how many rounds are we willing to go?
Yep, exactly.
Continuing your Mike Tyson philosophy.
Absolutely.
Well, let's take one quick question. Yes, sir.
Richard from Honolulu. Following on this.
You
yes.
going to invite us out there?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was there last week. Unbelievable stuff going on. And there's Lynn Finnegan, who, can I just say, Lynn was on the dance floor, y'all.
Yeah. We got our
Breaking
moves.
it out.
Following on this theme of deeper engagement of kids, one of the things that concerns me is that there are some very interesting options like the High School for Recording Arts in Minnesota that really try to start with kids from where they are.
Yep.
To me, the problem is that, one of the big problems is that basically the bargain of education as a climb your way slowly up the ladder just doesn't, kids don't buy into that these days. There's a segment of the population that does not. The question is, how is the charter movement really trying to create truly innovative, really innovative schools that start from the deeper problems of basic fundamental engagement? And I think the high school is an example. There was an attempt to open a similar charter school in, I believe it was Seattle or Washington. It failed for mismanagement, and they had a whole group of people that wanted to join it. It closed before it even began. But I'm looking for those networks that are dealing with the deep problems of disengagement.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
I think it is a great question. I think one of the things that we don't do well, we try so hard to prove that we're public schools sometimes that I think we kind of go overboard and we go off the cliff a little bit. And one area that I feel that that's the case is, if we're setting up schools and there's an expectation of what these schools are trying to do, we should be talking about whether or not this school is successful at what it, said that it was going to do. So if you have a school like the high school, which is able to graduate kids and get kids into college, and you got traditional public schools that aren't doing that, the test scores might not be where you want them to be. We have to be, I think, at least, nimble enough and sophisticated enough to have multiple measures of school quality to determine whether or not these schools are good schools. And if they are, help people create more of them. Because, those kids who are lost and who've dropped out and who aren't there, you got to find some way to get them in. And, setting up another traditional school and doing it the way that everybody else, that ain't going to work. You need some people that could connect with these kids on a whole different level and use the flexibility. One of my biggest disappointments in the charter movement is very few schools use the flexibility of time. Time, in my opinion, is the most valuable and precious resource that we have for educating kids. And we still, for the most part in the charter movement, sit along in these blocks like everybody else. And for that population of kids, we should be thinking about the clock and the calendar in completely different ways, I think, in order to be able to get them engaged and get them through school.
I know we're about ready to close, and I still think that it's just, it is just, I'm still in awe at being here and having this discussion. And as we talk about how we go forward and how we look at our movement, again, as you walk in, you see the dedication, and the question there on the granite stone is, what will become of the dream? And again, going back to those famous words of, it's not enough to have the integrated lunch counter. If the kid sitting there can't read the menu at an integrated counter, will the dream have been secured? So I think each of us, going back to Honolulu or Minneapolis or LA or wherever we're going, I think it is remembering why we came here and what this, this is beyond a museum. I mean, this is our living trust. With our witness to history here. I think it's with a renewed passion and commitment, knowing that it is probably as turbulent, the waters, as they have been for decades, but a commitment to swim and take our children with us and trust in our parents and our teachers and those who understand it's about taking that dream and making it real.
Commitment to the dream.
Good ending notes, unless you guys have more, but I just, Reverend Kyles, thank you for having us in your home. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Lisa, Gloria, Ken, Reverend Kyles. Let's give them all a round of applause for traveling to talk with us this morning. To the folks at the museum, thank you for opening your doors to us. This has just been an amazing conversation. The questions, observations from all of you, really powerful. I mentioned earlier that I like to read a little bit of history, and one of the things I think I've learned about our history as a nation is that it's a nation whose history is the expansion of rights and opportunities of a group of people fighting to expand their rights and opportunities. And it started with white male landowners asserting their rights and opportunities against the King of England. And then Andrew Jackson fought for white men who didn't own land to have the right to vote. And then the Civil War partially provided more rights to those who had been enslaved. And the women's movement, less than 100 years ago, chick power, less than 100 years ago.
Nope, exactly 100 years ago, women in Arizona and in the western states had our vote in
That's right.
in
The first state, wasn't it?
1912,
Yeah.
because why? We wanted to put it in our Constitution. The president said no, so we put it on the ballot, and men in Arizona gave women the vote in 1912.
Outstanding.
Excellent. Happy birthday, Arizona. Through the civil rights, and now I think what we're talking about is the next step in that American history of expanding rights and opportunities to more people who don't yet have them. That's what I hope we're all involved in this for. I thank you for joining us here in Memphis this week and look forward to working with you in the years to come to continue this effort.
Thank you, Greg.
Great.
Appreciate
Greg.
it. Good
Thank
conference.
you.
Good job.
You guys are great.